What is up, fam-a-lam? It is Smoke Joestar back here with another video. Just wanted to talk real quick about a lot of the discourse that I've been seeing surrounding Tekken 8's heat gauge. Now, a lot of the comparisons are being drawn to the Street Fighter 6 drive gauge, and you know, that's an apt comparison. They are both meters, but they serve two very different, very specific functions in their games. And I just wanted to go over those. In Street Fighter 6, right, that green gauge under your health bar is called the drive gauge. Now, you get a lot of actions surrounding that gauge, like your drive rush, which basically is when your character goes green, rushes in, and adds 2 extra frames to any move. So if you have something that's unsafe on block, it'll be a little bit less unsafe. If you have something that's plus on block or neutral, it'll be even more plus, giving you the advantage to kind of continue your pressure on your opponent or go for mix-ups or what have you. And you can also do things like drive rush cancel, which is what I just described, drive rush, but in a combo after any special cancelable hit. So what you're seeing in the background is the grand finals of EVO this year. Angry Bird playing Ken, Mena RD playing Blanca, and they'll hit each other and then they'll go green and dash in and continue the combo. That's what the drive rush cancel is. You have your overdrive moves, which are EX moves for anybody that's played Street Fighter, Darkstalkers, Mortal Kombat. Pretty much everything has some form of EX move, which will just give you extra startup or make a move safe or let you get a special property to make a combo better optimized. And that's what the offensive applications of the meter are. And you do have some defensive options, which are the drive parry, which is a stance that you take where you pretty much block or mitigate any incoming moves for a chance to stay, not necessarily stay neutral, but you don't have to guess the mix-up. So it's a radial parry. If you get hit at any point, it will block, quote unquote, block the correct way, and you basically have whatever frame advantage you would have on block. It's just you don't have to guess the mix-up, but that is an alternative to just blocking and guessing correctly. And the final thing that the drive meter lets you do actively is a drive reversal. So if you're familiar with like alpha counters, or in fighters they were called guard cancels. Basically, like while you're blocking, you hold forward and then 2 medium buttons, and you get a counter that resets the neutral. Doesn't do any real damage to your opponent. It does great damage, which is recoverable life. Like I said before, that's all you can do actively. Now, there are some passive properties, such as when you're guarding, instead of taking chip damage, as long as you have drive gauge, you'll take, I guess, chip in that instead of from your actual HP pool. So it becomes a game of meter management, because if you run out of drive gauge, you'll enter what's called burnout. Now in burnout, you don't have access to any of your active drive skills. So no EX moves, no parries, no drive rush cancels, no drive impacts, none of that stuff will work when you're in burnout. You also have an additional, I believe it's 2 frames of block stun added. So like if you get hit with a move and the move is normally, you know, -2 or -3, it will now be -1 or -2. That because you're in burnout, so you have no real way to get out of it. Also, if you're getting super pressured, you can't, you know, drive impact out of it. You can't drive reversal to kind of reset the neutral. You basically lose the round, more or less, essentially. And the biggest part of being in burnout is if you get drive impacted up against a wall, then you will enter the traditional stun, and basically your opponent gets a free combo for however much damage they want to do. And a lot of what you'll see at the higher levels is this fine-tuned game of mental checkers where both players will be low on drive gauge, and you come to this point, it's like, do I block and avoid the chip damage and lose the drive gauge and essentially cut myself out of options? Or do I risk the drive gauge and turn the situation around in my favor, or just get them off of me? And that's where a lot of the depth comes in. And I don't believe they do it in this set, but there was a set at EVO where it's like a character had enough health to survive a super, and they basically just ate the super so that their drive gauge could come back, and then they ended up putting their opponent in burnout, and they won the round, or they won the game. And that's kind of what a lot of people are looking at. Like the drive gauge is so infused into the game's DNA that there's so many layers to it, even outside of what you can do. But it's also a very crucial game to learn on top of like what Street Fighter 6 already offers. Like there's so much to already maintain, like situationally, and on top of that, managing your drive gauge, because it's basically your lifeblood in this game. If you can't DI, or if you can't drive reversal, if you can't drive parry, you have no defensive options. Even with that, your combo routes have to change, even if you do land a hit, because you have no overdrive moves or no drive rush cancels. So managing that is incredibly important, on top of like all the character knowledge you have to have, all the matchup knowledge you have to have, and it leads to a really deep game that surrounds the meter. And where the caveat comes in comparison to Tekken is that a lot of people are saying that the heat gauge in Tekken 8 is just hit buttons and just do dumb things, and that's not the case. Now with Tekken, they came out of the gate, right, and said that the heat gauge was meant to be a part of the core philosophy for Tekken 8, which was more aggression, longer combos, more damage, and that to an extent can lead to a simpler gauge, but all in all, there's still more than just, activate heat and fucking mash buttons and win the round, because Tekken 8 introduces chip damage. That's a first for the series, but most characters will only have it in heat. So it's not simply a matter of, do your heat engager, which is what starts heat mode, or just straight up enter heat mode with a move. You kind of have to figure out where it best fits in your combos. iMusician is cooking right now. Shout out iMusician. That's where this video is from. It's from a stream. But you have to figure out where it's best to place in your combos, or where it's best to try to chip somebody out. So as far as the combos go, there are some routes that people were doing in the closed network test. I didn't get a key, applied 2 times for both consoles, but Namco Bandai hates me, so I didn't get anything. But there were some routes that people were doing with their combos, and they were figuring out, oh, okay, well, I can optimize better if I don't start with a heat engager, or if I don't spin and then do a heat engager afterwards. Like there was a ebb and flow to the combos, and that's really where the heat system shines. Now, it's not as involved as the drive gauge is in Tekken 6, and that's fine, because that wasn't the goal of the heat gauge. Street Fighter 6 kind of built its mechanics and characters around heat usage and, just their character identities. And Tekken kind of took their characters and were like, all right, cool, how can we make gameplay more aggressive without, robbing the characters of their own personal identities, or overwhelming someone with a bunch of mechanics? And that's where the heat gauge comes in, because on paper, yes, it is enter heat mode, and then because it's using a combo, you hit more buttons, do more damage. Yes, it is that to a degree, but there's a lot more nuance than just enter heat mode, win the round. There was one particular instance, because there are two ways that you could really enter heat mode, and one of them is by doing what's called your heat engager, which is what Hwoarang just did right there, which is just, raw move and it'll start heat. And most times doing it that way will not get you the optimized combo. It'll give you, that it'll basically reset the neutral or make you plus if you land the hit. But it has way more implications than just do this move and a thing happens. So with Tekken, the design philosophy behind the gauge is different than it is in Street Fighter 6, and that's not a bad thing, because there were a lot of people saying that, like, man, I wish the heat gauge was like the drive gauge in Street Fighter 6. No, you don't. You do not. I promise you don't, because that making the heat gauge the drive gauge with the amount of things you already have to remember and know how to do in Tekken, people would have been off-put by Tekken 8. Literally the only players that would play Tekken 8 would be longtime vets and top players. Those would be the only players. New players would be scared off by that. The drive gauge works in Street Fighter 6 because Street Fighter is a simpler game than Tekken. Not saying it's simple or brain dead, but to be successful in Street Fighter is a much easier task than it is in Tekken. And the drive gauge is there, to kind of give you something to manage, but also give you something to kind of, show off your identity, because nobody's combos are going to be the same, because every character has, I think, 3 or 4 different ways, like for their heat engagers. So you might find a route that works better for damage. I might find a route that works better for Oki. I might find a route that, is as an optimized version of your route, just because I didn't immediately do the heat engager or I didn't immediately spin. And there are a lot of characters in the game that just have, some characters are traditional. You do your launcher, do your combo filler, get the spin mechanic, which, would have been tailspin in Tekken 7 is what it was called. You get your spin mechanic, you do a heat engager, which is, the move that kind of bounces you down like Tekken 6 did. Use another move that lets you go into Heat Rush, which is Tekken's version of the drive rush cancel that we talked about earlier. And then you kind of do your combo ender, or if you're close to wall, you do your wall extender, then do your wall combo. And like, some characters are traditional in that way, and sometimes it'll probably be better to do combos that way. But for the most part, I feel like the heat gauge, I almost called it the drive gauge, the heat gauge in Tekken 7 kind of lends itself to the design philosophy of the game. Like, I'm gonna be saying that a lot in the coming months, I believe. But that was the whole goal of the drive gauge. I did it anyway, I'm a fucking idiot. But that was the whole point of the heat gauge. Like they said, it's like, we want this to be a much more aggressive game. How do we do that? We're gonna give moves that are plus on block, but you have a timer in which to use those moves. Most characters' moves that chip come from the gauge, like I said earlier. There's that element. There's also the element of which routes are your character's optimal routes and when should you do those. And that's just like a big piece of identity. They serve two completely different purposes, and I believe that they are both executed very well for what they're trying to do. It's not really an apt comparison because the games themselves are being designed around those gauges, and I don't think that you could take one from one game, put it in the other, and have it work, just because it would kind of take away what makes Street Fighter 6 and Tekken 8, So that's just my 2 cents on it. Like, I saw a lot of discourse saying like the heat gauge, like there's nothing to it, like you literally just activate heat and then hit all the shit. And from what I've seen, again, because I didn't get my hands on it, but from what I've seen, what I've watched everybody play, that doesn't seem to be the case. It might be in the closed network test because nobody has like real deal lab time. And we'll figure everything else out when we get our hands on the game, or if they do like another extended beta that's open to everybody, because I want to play this game. That would be great. But that's gonna do it for this video, man. I appreciate y'all coming through, watching, listening to your boy ramble about fighting games, me being the Tekken nerd I am. I will see y'all in the future. Peace.